I sat in federal court listening to my father tell the judge I was overreacting to a family reunion. He called it a celebration, but I knew it was a trap designed to manufacture a confession I never made. Then Judge Holloway looked up and froze the room, stating that it was not just that I was uninvited, but that my family had deliberately needed me absent to make their lie work. My name is Maisie Stewart, and as I sat in the hushed, sterile atmosphere of the federal courthouse in Austin, Texas, I realized that my family was not just trying to ruin me, they were trying to erase me. The air conditioning in the courtroom hummed with a low mechanical drone that seemed to vibrate against my ribcage, a stark contrast to the burning heat of the Texas afternoon outside. Inside here, everything was cold. The table beneath my hands was cold. The expression on my sister's face was cold. And the realization settling in my gut was the coldest thing of all. I looked across the aisle. There was Sloane Klein, my younger sister, sitting with the posture of a queen who had already won the war. She wore a navy suit that I knew cost more than my first car. Her hair pulled back in a severe glossy bun that pulled her features tight. She did not look at me. She was too busy playing the role of the concerned creditor, the reluctant executioner doing what had to be done for the greater good. Behind her sat our parents. Marilyn Klein, my mother, was dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. It was a performance I had seen 1,000 times in the living rooms of Savannah, usually deployed to guilt a contractor into lowering a bid or to shame a neighbor into silence. Her tears were always punctual. They arrived exactly when the audience needed to feel sympathy. Beside her, my father, Everett Klein, sat like a stone statue. He nodded slowly as Sloane's lawyer spoke, acting as a one-man jury, validating every lie before it even fully left the attorney's mouth. They had filed for involuntary bankruptcy against my company, Breakwater Signal Works. In the world of business, this was the nuclear option. It was not a lawsuit. It was not a demand letter. It was a declaration to the federal government and the entire business world that Maisie Stewart was insolvent, incompetent, and hiding assets. It was designed to freeze my accounts, panic my federal clients, and shatter the reputation I had spent 5 years building in the tech sector. Sloane's lawyer, a man with a voice like gravel and a suit that fit too loosely around the shoulders, was pacing in front of the bench. He gestured toward me as if I were an unruly child who had stolen from the cookie jar. "Your Honor," he said, turning to Judge Holloway, "we take no pleasure in this. The Klein family has supported Ms. Stewart for years, but the debt in question, totaling $1.8 million, is not a figment of our imagination. It is a family loan provided to jumpstart her venture, a loan she has conveniently decided to forget now that she has secured federal contracts." He paused for effect, letting the number hang in the air. $1.8 million. We are not relying solely on paper trails, the lawyer continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. We have witness testimony, just last week, at the Klein Family Legacy Night in Savannah, a reunion attended by over 50 respected members of the community. Ms. Stewart verbally acknowledged this debt in the presence of her family. She admitted she owed the money. She admitted she had no intention of paying it back unless forced. This petition is that force. I sat there, my hands clasped so tightly together that my knuckles turned white. I was calm. It was a terrifying, unnatural kind of calm. I had known they would come for me eventually. When Breakwater started winning legitimate government bids, when my name started appearing in industry journals without the word Klein attached to it, I knew Sloane's jealousy would metastasize into action. I had prepared for intellectual property theft. I had prepared for slander. But I had not prepared for this. I had not prepared for them to use a memory of a party I never attended to slit my throat in a court of law. My lawyer, Nadia Reyes, sat beside me. She was the opposite of everything the Kleins represented. She was sharp, economical with her movements, and utterly unimpressed by theatrics. She didn't look at the weeping mother or the stoic father. She looked at the judge. She checked her watch. She tapped a pen against her legal pad. Nadia leaned over to me, her voice a low hum. "Stay still. Maisie, let them finish the performance." I watched the judge. Judge Holloway was a man who looked like he had seen every variety of human greed and was tired of all of them. He peered over his reading glasses at Sloane's lawyer. "So," the judge said, his voice dry, "you are telling me that the debtor confessed to this liability 7 days ago?" In person. "Yes, Your Honor," the lawyer replied smoothly. It was a heartfelt moment, turned sour. "The family just wants what is fair." Judge Holloway nodded slowly and made a note. Then he turned his gaze to us. "Ms. Reyes, your response." Nadia stood up. She did not pace. She did not wave her arms. She simply picked up a thick folder from our table and held it out. "Your Honor," Nadia said, her voice clear and cutting through the theatrical fog my family had created. "We move to dismiss this petition immediately, with prejudice, and we would like to submit a supplemental evidentiary packet for your review." Sloane's lawyer bristled. "Objection. We haven't seen this. You will see it now," Nadia said, sliding a copy across the table to him before handing the original to the bailiff to take up to the bench. "Inside that packet are 3 things," Nadia narrated as the judge opened the folder. "First, a complete independent audit of Breakwater Signal Works, dated 2 days ago, showing solvent liquidity and zero external debt to the Klein family or any entity associated with them. Second, Ms. Stewart's travel records, including flight manifests and hotel receipts, proving she was in Austin, Texas, for the entirety of last weekend attending a tech conference. I watched Sloane. For the first time, the Queen's mask slipped. Her eyes darted to the folder, then to her lawyer. She shifted in her seat. My mother stopped crying instantly, the tears drying up as if someone had turned off a faucet. My father stopped nodding. And third," Nadia continued, her voice dropping an octave, "becoming dangerous, a simple PDF file. It is the digital invitation for the event in question, the Klein Family Legacy Night." Judge Holloway flipped through the pages. He studied the audit. He glanced at the flight records, then he stopped at the last page. He frowned. He adjusted his glasses and leaned in closer, reading the fine print. The silence in the room stretched thin, like a rubber band about to snap. "Ms. Stewart," the judge said, not looking up. "Yes, Your Honor," I answered. My voice was steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "You say you were not at this reunion." The judge stated. "I was not." I said. The judge looked up then. His eyes locked onto mine. "Were you invited?" "No, Your Honor." I said. Sloane's lawyer jumped up. "Your Honor, this is a semantic argument. Whether she received a formal invitation or not is irrelevant to the existence of the debt." "Sit down." "Counselor," Judge Holloway snapped. The command cracked like a whip. The lawyer sat. The judge turned his attention to the back of the room, directly at my father. Everett Klein met his gaze, but I saw the slight twitch in his jaw. "The crack in the armor, Ms. Stewart?" the judge asked, still looking at my father. "If you were not invited, did you ask why?" "Yes," I replied. I called my father 2 days before the event when I saw a post about it on social media. I asked him why I was the only member of the immediate family excluded. And what did he say? I took a breath. I let the words form in my mouth, tasting the bitterness of them one last time before I spat them out for the record. He told me, "It is just a reunion." I saw my father flinch. It was small, barely a millimeter of movement, but I saw it. That was the phrase. The weaponized dismissal he had used to brush me off, to make me feel small and petty for wanting to be included. It is just a reunion. Judge Holloway looked down at the paper again. He read from the email metadata attached to the invitation in the file Nadia had submitted. "This document," the judge said, his voice cold, "was sent from the administrative account of Mr. Everett Klein. It includes a blind carbon copy note to one Sloane Klein. The note reads, 'Ensure this distribution list excludes Maisie. We need the narrative to hold without her interference.'" The room went deadly silent. My mother gasped, a sound that was finally genuine. Sloane went pale, her skin turning the color of old parchment. Judge Holloway took off his glasses and placed them on the bench. He looked at Sloane's lawyer, then at Sloane, and finally at my parents. "It appears," the judge said, measuring every syllable, "that someone in this courtroom is attempting to use the federal judicial system to validate a fiction. You claim she confessed at a party she was explicitly barred from attending. You claim she owes a debt that does not appear on any ledger." He looked at me. It was a look of pity, and I hated it, but it was also a look of understanding. "It is not just that you were not invited, Ms. Stewart," the judge said softly. "It is that they deliberately needed you not to be there." The truth hung in the air, ugly and undeniable. They didn't just forget me. They orchestrated my absence. They needed an empty chair so they could tell a story to 50 witnesses, a story about a prodigal daughter who took their money and ran. If I had been there, I would have denied it. I would have fought. But by keeping me away, they turned my silence into a confession. Sloane's lawyer was frantically whispering to her. Sloane was shaking her head, her eyes wide with panic. She looked at Dad, waiting for him to fix it. That was how it always worked. Sloane broke things, and Dad fixed them, but Dad couldn't fix this. Not here, not in a place where facts mattered more than feelings. "Your Honor," Sloane's lawyer stammered, trying to salvage the wreckage. "There seems to be a misunderstanding regarding the guest list. Perhaps an administrative error. However, the debt is real. We have sworn affidavits from family members who claim, save it." Judge Holloway cut him off. "You are skating on very thin ice, Counselor. I am looking at a motion for involuntary bankruptcy based on a conversation that physically could not have happened." Nadia stood up again. She didn't look triumphant. She looked focused. She knew we had wounded them, but she wanted to make sure they didn't get up. "Your Honor," Nadia said, "if the court permits, we have one final piece of evidence to submit. It was provided to us late last night by a member of the Klein family who wishes to remain anonymous for the moment, but is willing to testify if this goes to trial." She pulled a small black USB drive from her pocket and placed it on the table. "This is an audio recording taken during the cocktail hour of the reunion in question," Nadia explained. "It captures a conversation between Mr. Everett Klein and Ms. Sloane Klein." My father stood up. "Objection," he roared, forgetting he wasn't the one wearing the robe. "That is a private conversation. Sit down, Mr. Klein." The bailiff barked. Stepping forward, my father sank back into his chair, his face a mottled red. Judge Holloway nodded to the court clerk. "Play it." The clerk took the drive. A moment of static filled the room, followed by the clinking of glasses and the low murmur of a crowd. Then, clear as day, my father's voice cut through the noise. It was his business voice, the one he used when he was closing a deal he knew was shady but profitable. "Don't worry about the details. Sloane," his voice said from the speakers, "just stick to the script. We tell everyone the loan is past due. We look sad about it." Then Sloane's voice, sharp and anxious. "But what if someone texts her? What if she shows up?" And then, the line that would haunt me for the rest of my life. The line that proved that every birthday card, every hug, every family dinner for the past 30 years had been nothing but a long con. My father's voice laughed, a dry, dismissive sound. "She won't show up. I handled it. And as long as she doesn't come, everyone will believe what we tell them." The recording clicked off. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a family breaking. It was the sound of the floor dropping out from under them. I looked at my father. He was staring at his hands. I looked at my mother. She was staring at Sloane. And I looked at Sloane. She was looking at me. And in her eyes, I didn't see regret. I saw pure, unadulterated hatred. Judge Holloway looked down from the bench. His face was hard as granite. "I am going to take a 10-minute recess," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "And when I come back, I expect a very good explanation as to why I should not refer this entire matter to the United States Attorney's Office for perjury and fraud." He slammed the gavel. The sound echoed like a gunshot. I sat there, frozen. Nadia placed a hand on my arm, but I couldn't feel it. I watched my family huddle together with their lawyer, their voices raised in frantic whispers. They looked like rats on a sinking ship, "It is just a reunion," Dad had said. No, it was a funeral, and they had just dug their own graves. To understand why a father would testify against his own daughter in federal court, you have to understand the soil we grew up on. In Savannah, Georgia, the ground is soft, made of marsh and sand, but the social hierarchy is built of concrete. The Klein family name was etched into that concrete decades ago. We were coastal real estate royalty. The people who turned swamps into subdivisions and sold the dream of a southern lifestyle to wealthy northerners looking for a tax haven. In our world, reputation was a currency more stable than the dollar. Truth was considered a vulgar inconvenience, something to be swept under Persian rugs or drowned out by the clinking of crystal glasses. Appearance was the only god we worshipped. I am Maisie Stewart. I am the eldest daughter, the one born with my father's original nose and my grandmother's quiet disposition. I do not have the blonde, camera-ready sheen that my sister Sloane possesses. Sloane came 3 years after me, and from the moment she arrived, the dynamic was set in stone. She was the protagonist. I was the narrator. She was the one the light hit. I was the shadow that gave the light definition. Growing up, the difference in how we were handled was subtle at first, then glaring. When we played Monopoly, if Sloane ran out of money, my father, Everett, would slide a few extra bills from the bank under the table so she wouldn't cry. If I ran out of money, he would tell me it was a lesson in fiscal responsibility. It taught me how to count every penny. It taught Sloane that the bank would always open for her if she smiled wide enough. By the time we reached our 20s, this dynamic had professionalized. My father brought Sloane to client dinners while she was still a sophomore in college. She would sit there, nursing a white wine she didn't drink, laughing at jokes she didn't understand, and the clients loved her. She was the shiny object that distracted them from the fine print. I, on the other hand, was the fine print. I was the one in the back office with the paralegals and the accountants. I was the one correcting the zoning applications my father had filled out wrong. I was the one drafting the addendums that kept the company from getting sued for environmental violations. I knew every acre of land we owned, every lien, every easement. I knew the business. Sloane knew the people. And in the Klein family, knowing the people was the only thing that counted as work. My mother, Marilyn, was the enforcer of this social order. To Marilyn Klein, a dinner party was not a meal. It was a strategic military operation. She wielded hospitality like a weapon. The way she arranged a table told you exactly where you stood in her favor. If you were seated to her right, you were in. If you were seated at the end of the table near the kitchen door, you were on probation. If you weren't invited, you were dead. This is where the concept of the reunion weaponized itself in my psyche long before the courtroom in Austin. In most families, a reunion is a messy, loud gathering with bad potato salad and awkward conversations with cousins you haven't seen in 5 years. In the Klein family, a reunion was a performance review. It was the annual audit of your social worth. The guest list was curated with the precision of a diamond cutter. Being invited meant you still belonged to the brand. It meant you were a credit to the legacy. Being excluded meant you had failed to maintain the aesthetic. I spent the first 30 years of my life trying to earn my seat at that table. I thought if I worked harder, if I saved the company enough money, if I fixed enough of Sloane's mistakes, I would eventually be granted the same respect she was given by birthright. I remember one humid afternoon in July, about 4 years before I finally left for Texas. I was sitting in my father's study, surrounded by the smell of old leather and stale cigar smoke. I had just caught a massive error in a contract for a new marina project. If I hadn't seen it, the company would have been on the hook for millions in wetlands restoration costs. I showed it to my father. He glanced at it, nodded, and signed the corrected version without looking at me. "Good catch." "Maisie," he mumbled, already turning back to his computer. I stood there, waiting. I wanted to thank you. I wanted him to look at me the way he looked at Sloane when she simply walked into a room wearing a new dress. "Dad," I said, my voice trembling slightly, "I really think I should be the lead on the marina project. I know the regulations better than anyone. Sloane doesn't even know the difference between a marsh buffer and a tidal line." My father took off his reading glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He sighed, a sound that signaled I was being difficult. "Maisie," he said, his voice dropping to that patronizing tone he reserved for me. "You are incredibly smart. You have a mind for the details. But you don't have the right standing." The right standing. I asked him what that meant. He looked me up and down, not with malice, but with a cool, detached assessment. "Sloan has a presence," he said. "People want to say yes to her. You make people feel like they need to read the contract twice. You are better suited for the shadows. Honey, it is where you shine." He thought it was a compliment. He told me I was born to be invisible, but the moment that truly broke me, the moment that severed the emotional cord long before the legal one, happened 6 months later. The family business was facing a quiet crisis. A lawsuit from a conservation group was threatening to halt our biggest development in a decade. It was a disaster. My father was panicking. Sloan was useless, offering to host a cocktail party to smooth things over, which would have done absolutely nothing against a federal injunction. I took over. I spent 3 weeks barely sleeping. I dug through county archives from 1950. I found a precedent regarding land use that invalidated the conservation group's claim. I drafted the motion to dismiss myself, fed it to our external counsel, and we won. I saved the project. I saved the company. 2 weeks later, the family held a charity gala to celebrate the groundbreaking of that very development. It was a black tie affair at the country club. The room was filled with the scent of lilies and expensive perfume. I stood by the wall, wearing a dress I had bought off the rack, holding a glass of tepid water. I watched my father walk up to the podium. He beamed at the crowd. He spoke about resilience. He spoke about vision. And then he said, "I want to bring up the person who made this possible, my daughter, who fought tirelessly to ensure this vision became a reality." My heart hammered in my chest. For 1 second, just one foolish second, I thought he meant me. I took a half step forward. "Sloan, come up here," he boomed. The room erupted in applause. Sloan glided onto the stage in a shimmering gold gown, looking surprised and delightful. She kissed my father on the cheek. She took the microphone. She didn't know the first thing about the lawsuit. She didn't know the case law I had found. She probably couldn't even spell the name of the conservation group, but she smiled, she waved, she accepted the bouquet of roses. "Thank you, everyone," she said, her voice light and airy. It was a team effort, but we just believed in this project so much. I stood frozen. I felt the blood drain from my face. My mother was in the front row, clapping so hard her bracelets jangled. She looked back, scanned the room, found me in the shadows, and gave me a tight, brief nod. It was a command. "Stay there. Don't make a scene. This is the script." That was the night I realized the truth. In the Klein family, labor was my currency, but credit was Sloan's inheritance. I could work until my fingers bled, but the glory would always be transferred to her account. The reunion wasn't just a party. It was the physical manifestation of this lie. It was a stage where they enacted the play of the perfect family, and for the play to work, everyone had to play their role. Sloan was the star, Dad was the director, Mom was the producer, and I was the stagehand, expected to keep the lights on and then disappear behind the curtain when the applause started. But as I stood there watching Sloan hold the award I realized something else. Being loved in this house was a contract with terrible terms. It required me to amputate parts of myself to fit into the box they had built. It required me to agree that I was less than her. I left the gala early that night. I didn't say goodbye. I drove to my apartment, packed 2 suitcases, and started looking at maps of Texas. So when the lawyer in the Austin courtroom said I had confessed at a reunion, I didn't just feel anger. I felt a sick sort of recognition. They were doing it again. They were taking my reality, rewriting it, and giving the starring role to Sloan. They were using a party, the ultimate symbol of their power, to try and crush the one thing I had built that they couldn't take credit for. They thought I was still the stagehand. They thought I would stay in the shadows because that was my standing. But they had forgotten one thing. The person in the shadows sees everything. And after 30 years of watching them lie, I knew exactly how to dismantle the script. Leaving Savannah was not a dramatic exit with tires screeching and bridges burning. It was a quiet, suffocating drive west on Interstate 10. My Honda Civic packed to the roof with boxes of books and a single suitcase of clothes. I drove until the humidity of the Georgia coast was replaced by the dry, baking heat of Texas. I chose Austin because it felt like the opposite of home. It was loud, chaotic, full of people who wore t-shirts to business meetings, and nobody cared who my grandfather was. I rented a studio apartment that smelled faintly of curry and old carpet, a place so small that my bed also served as my office chair. This was where Breakwater Signal Works was born. It wasn't born in a boardroom with mahogany tables. It was born on a folding card table I bought at a thrift store for $15. I had an idea, but an idea is worthless without execution. I knew that coastal infrastructure was crumbling, and I knew that the insurance models used by companies like my father's were outdated. They were looking at historical data. What happened 10 years ago? I wanted to build a system that looked forward, using real-time weather patterns and topographical shifts to predict where the water would go before the first drop of rain fell. I had no engineering degree, I had no coding background. All I had was the obsessive attention to detail that my father had exploited for a decade. I spent the first 6 months teaching myself Python and SQL from YouTube videos and pirated textbooks. I lived on instant oatmeal and cheap gas station coffee. My schedule was brutal. I worked a remote data entry job during the day to pay the rent, and from 8 at night until 3 in the morning. I built Breakwater. I scraped public data from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. I learned how to read LiDAR maps. I built a crude prototype that could simulate a Category 3 hurricane hitting the Texas coast. It was lonely work. There were days when I didn't speak to a single human being. I would look at my phone, seeing the notifications from the family group chat I had muted, but not left pictures of Sloan at brunches, Mom at galas, Dad on the golf course. They looked so shiny. I looked in the mirror and saw dark circles and unwashed hair, but for the first time in my life, the exhaustion belonged to me. The sweat was mine. The small victories, like getting a piece of code to run without crashing, were mine. Then came the lesson that almost broke me. I met a guy at a tech mixer. Let's call him Julian. He was charismatic, dressed in expensive denim, and claimed to have deep connections with angel investors. I was desperate for capital. I showed him my deck. I walked him through the algorithm. I trusted him because he listened to me in a way my father never did. He nodded. He asked the right questions. He told me I was a visionary. 2 weeks later, Julian stopped answering my calls. A month after that, I saw a press release on a tech blog. A new startup called Coast Guard was launching a predictive flood model. The screenshots were identical to my interface. The value proposition was my pitch, word for word. I sat on the floor of my apartment and dry heaved until there was nothing left in my stomach. I had been played. I had been the naive girl from the back office again, handing over my work to someone who knew how to smile and shake hands. I called a lawyer, a friend of a friend. He told me that without a patent or a non-disclosure agreement, suing Julian would cost me $50,000 I didn't have. Walk away, he said. It happens. I didn't walk away. I got angry. Not the hot, tantrum anger that Sloan used to get what she wanted, but a cold, industrial anger. I deleted my old code. I wiped the slate clean. Julian had stolen my prototype, but he didn't have my brain. He didn't understand the nuance of soil erosion tables or the specific density of salt marsh barriers. I rebuilt Breakwater, and this time, I made it meaner. I added layers of complexity he couldn't copy. I integrated satellite imagery feeds. I reached out to a professor at the University of Texas and convinced him to peer review my methodology so I would have independent verification. I worked for 40 days straight, sleeping in 4-hour bursts. When I relaunched, I didn't go for the investors. I went for the customers. I pitched to small county governments along the Gulf Coast, places that couldn't afford the big consultants, but couldn't afford to be underwater either. I got my first contract with a small county south of Houston, $5,000. It wasn't enough to pay my rent for 3 months, but when that check cleared, I stared at it for an hour. It was the first money I had ever made that didn't feel like an allowance. That year, I met Daniel Morgan. Daniel was a structural engineer who specialized in bridge retrofitting. We met at a zoning hearing where we were both waiting to speak. He was reading a paperback novel, completely unbothered by the bureaucrats shouting at each other. He was calm. He was solid. He wore flannel shirts because they were comfortable, not because they were a fashion statement. On our first date, he asked me about my work. When I started explaining the predictive algorithms, he didn't glaze over. He didn't interrupt. He leaned in and asked about the error margins. He treated me like an intellectual peer. We got married 18 months later at the courthouse. No guests, no orchestra, just us and a witness we pulled from the hallway. I wore a white sundress I bought at the mall. When Daniel looked at me, he didn't see a Klein heiress or a disappointment. He saw Maisie. I didn't invite my parents. I sent them a card 2 weeks later. My mother sent back a text. "Oh, that is nice. Is he successful?" I didn't reply. I didn't need to, because by then, Breakwater Signal Works was no longer a scrappy startup. We had moved from county contracts to state-level consulting. My system had successfully predicted a flash flood event in Louisiana 3 hours before the National Weather Service issued a warning, saving a local municipality millions in emergency response costs. The industry started to whisper about us. Then came the game changer, the Federal Resilience Procurement Office, a massive bureaucratic arm of the government tasked with hardening national infrastructure against climate change, put out a request for proposal. It was a 10-year contract to modernize their risk assessment dashboard. The big firms, the Deloittes, the McKinseys were all bidding. I spent 2 weeks writing the proposal. I didn't use buzzwords. I used data. I showed them exactly where their current models were failing. 6 months later, on a Tuesday morning, I got the email. We had won. The contract value was substantial. It was enough to hire a staff of 20. It was enough to buy a building. It was enough to put me in a tax bracket that would make even my father raise an eyebrow. I sat in my office, which now had a view of the Austin skyline, and felt a strange sensation. I waited for the urge to call my father. I waited for the desire to rub it in Sloane's face. It didn't come. I realized that telling them would only invite them in. If I told them, my success would become a topic of conversation at their dinner table. Mom would critique my website. Dad would offer unsolicited advice on how to manage my cash flow. Sloane would ask for a job or a loan. My success was precious because it was contaminated by them. It was the one thing in the world that was 100% Maisie Stewart, so I kept it quiet. I didn't post on social media. I didn't update my LinkedIn profile with the contract details. I let Breakwater Signal Works be a faceless entity in the government database. But the world is smaller than we think, especially the world of people who chase money. It happened at a steakhouse in Savannah, 1,000 miles away from my quiet victory. I learned the details later, but the scene is easy enough to reconstruct. My father was having dinner with an old commercial real estate partner, a man named Jim who had recently pivoted into federal contracting. They were drinking scotch, cutting into ribeyes, talking about the market. My father, ever the braggart, was probably complaining about regulations or boasting about a new golf course development. Jim, trying to make conversation, likely said, "You know, Everett, I saw a familiar name on the federal bid list last week. A company out of Austin just snagged the FRPO resilience contract. Massive deal." My father would have shrugged. "Austin is full of tech companies." "Yeah," Jim would have continued, but the CEO's name caught my eye. "Stewart, Maisie Stewart. Isn't that your eldest girl's married name?" I can imagine the silence that followed. I can imagine my father's fork pausing halfway to his mouth. "Maisie," he would have said. Laughing it off? "No. She is doing some freelance data work. She is not running a federal contractor. She doesn't have the stomach for that kind of pressure." "Well," Jim would have insisted, pulling up the press release on his phone, "it says here she is the founder, Breakwater Signal Works." Sloane was at that dinner. I know she was, because she never missed a chance to be seen at the table with the men. She would have been listening. And unlike my father, who dismissed me out of habit, Sloane would have felt a prick of alarm. She would have taken her phone out under the table. She would have searched the federal procurement database. She would have seen the numbers. And in that moment, the narrative she had built, the story that she was the golden child and I was the failure, began to crack. She didn't see my success as a good thing. She saw it as a threat. If I was successful, if I was rich, if I was powerful on my own terms, then she wasn't special anymore. And worse, she realized I had done it without them. That was the spark. That was the moment the jealousy turned into a strategy. She didn't just want to compete with me. She wanted to punish me for rising above my station. She needed to drag me back down to the mud so she could look down on me again. And so, the investigation began. Not by the government, but by my own sister, looking for a loose thread she could pull to unravel my entire life. Sloan did not call me when she found my name in the federal database. A normal sister might have picked up the phone to ask if the rumors were true, perhaps even with a hint of genuine curiosity, but Sloan was not a normal sister. She was a creature of territory, and I had just been discovered building a castle on land she thought was uninhabitable. Instead of calling, she went to war. I know now that she spent the weeks following that dinner in a state of manic investigation. She paid for premium access to government contracting data. She pulled the incorporation papers for Breakwater Signal Works. She saw my signature as the registered agent. She saw the revenue projections, and as the reality of my independence settled in, her shock calcified into a cold, hard rage. It was not just that I was successful, it was that my success was a direct insult to the family narrative. I was supposed to be the cautionary tale, the one who left the safety of the Klein empire and faded into obscurity. By thriving, I was proving that the Klein empire was not necessary for survival. That was a heresy she could not allow to stand. She began the campaign in the kitchen of my parents' house. It started with small drops of poison, carefully measured to test the waters. She would sit with my mother while they arranged flowers or looked over catering menus, and she would sigh. "I am just worried about Maisie," she would say, her voice dripping with counterfeit concern. "I looked up that company of hers. It looks very unstable. These government contracts are tricky. They can be canceled overnight. I think she is in over her head." My mother, Marilyn, whose understanding of business was limited to how it affected her social calendar, would nod. She loved the idea of me being in trouble. It was a familiar dynamic. If I was in trouble, I needed them. If I needed them, they had power. Then Sloan moved on to my father. She knew exactly where to press to get a reaction. Everett Klein was currently fighting a losing battle with environmental regulators over a proposed golf course in the wetlands. He hated the word resilience. He hated climate data. To him, these were just expensive hurdles invented by liberals to stop him from making money. So when Sloan told him that my company, Breakwater, was actually part of that system, that I was essentially one of the people making his life difficult, it turned his indifference into active hostility. I became the enemy. I was no longer just his disappointing daughter. I was part of the regulatory machine that was eating into his profit margins. She told him, "Maisie is selling data that stops development. Dad, she is working against people like us." That was the emotional groundwork. But Sloan knew that emotions were not enough to destroy a company. She needed a weapon. She needed a debt. And since one did not exist, she decided to invent one. She went digging through the family financial archives. She was looking for a transaction, any transaction, that she could twist into a weapon. She found it in a ledger from 5 years ago. It was a transfer of $1.8 million. I remembered that day clearly. It was during the chaotic weeks before I left Savannah. My father had been trying to close a deal on a commercial complex, but he needed to move liquidity quickly to a holding company to avoid a lien from a subcontractor he was refusing to pay. He had asked Sloan to facilitate the transfer through her personal account to make it look like a family investment rather than a corporate shuffle. I had done the paperwork, I had typed the wire instructions, the money had gone from the main company account, through Sloan, and directly into the holding company. It had never touched my hands. It had never even been in the same room as me. But the paper trail was messy. My father, in his arrogance, had never formalized the final step of the documentation. Sloane looked at that gap in the records and saw her opportunity. She began to rewrite history. In her version, that $1.8 million was not a corporate shuffle, it was a seed loan. She told my parents that I had come to her, begging for capital to start Breakwater. She claimed she had convinced Dad to lend me the money through her, to keep it off the official company books so the board wouldn't ask questions. It was a lie so bold it was almost admirable. She pitched it to my parents over a Sunday dinner. I can imagine the scene. The roast beef, the heavy silverware, the tension. She probably said, "I did not want to bring this up before." But Maisie promised she would pay us back as soon as she got her first big contract. Now she has millions coming in from the federal government, and she has not sent a dime. She is ghosting us. My father would have frowned, trying to recall the specifics of a transaction from 5 years ago. He moved so much money around that the details often blurred, but the narrative felt right to him. Of course I would need his money to succeed. The idea that I could build a tech company with my own savings and grit was impossible in his worldview. Therefore, I must have used his money. It was the only explanation that kept his ego intact. So he agreed. "Yes," he said, "I remember that. The startup loan." My mother jumped on board immediately. For her, this story was perfect. It resolved the cognitive dissonance of my success. If I was rich, it was because they had made me rich. If I was successful, it was because of their generosity. I was not a self-made woman. I was an ungrateful investment. Once the lie was established as truth within the walls of the Klein estate, Sloane took the next step. She didn't call the family attorney, old Mr. Mautz Henderson, who had known me since I was a child and might have asked inconvenient questions. She hired a shark. She found a bankruptcy specialist in Atlanta, a man known for aggressive litigation and scorched earth tactics. She told him the story her sister had borrowed nearly $2 million on a verbal family agreement, struck it rich, and was now refusing to acknowledge the debt. The lawyer explained the problem. Verbal agreements are hard to prove, especially for that amount of money. The statute of limitations was tricky. It was a he said, she said situation, unless, the lawyer likely suggested, there was an acknowledgement of the debt, a recent one, if she admitted to it in front of witnesses, or if we had a record of her confirming the obligation, we could move for involuntary bankruptcy. That would freeze her assets immediately. Involuntary bankruptcy. Sloane must have smiled when she heard those words. It was the ultimate sabotage. For a federal contractor like Breakwater, a bankruptcy petition is a death sentence. The moment the filing hits the public record, the government compliance officers get an alert. Security clearances are suspended, contracts are paused. It creates a stain of financial instability that is almost impossible to scrub off. She didn't need to win the lawsuit. She just needed to file it. The filing itself was the bomb. But she needed that acknowledgement. She needed a witness. This is where the idea of the reunion was born. It wasn't born out of a desire to see family. It was born out of procedural necessity. Sloane needed a stage. She needed a room full of people who were loyal to the Klein brand. People who would nod along when told a story. People who would unknowingly serve as a Greek chorus to my destruction. She planned the Klein family legacy night. She rented the ballroom at the most expensive hotel in Savannah. She ordered the flowers. She hired the photographer, and then she sat down with the guest list. She invited the cousins from Atlanta. She invited the business partners. She invited the neighbors. She even invited the old housekeeper who had retired 3 years ago. And then she came to my name. My father's assistant, a woman who had always been kind to me, had prepared the digital invitations. She had included me on the list automatically. Sloane opened the file. She saw my email address, and with a few clicks, she deleted it. But she didn't just delete it. She added a note to the file, a specific instruction that would later become the smoking gun in Judge Holloway's courtroom. She wrote, "Do not forward to Maisie. We are handling her separately." It was a masterstroke of malice. By not inviting me, she ensured I would not be there to defend myself. By having the party, she created a specific time and place where the confession could allegedly happen. She told the extended family that I was coming. She told them I was flying in from Texas to celebrate the family's success and to make things right. She set the stage for a prodigal daughter who never arrived. I can picture her standing in front of the mirror the night she sent those invitations. She probably smoothed her hair, checked her teeth, and told herself she was doing the right thing. She told herself she was just collecting what was owed. She convinced herself that I was the villain, the thief who had stolen the Klein magic and run away to Texas. She didn't know that she was handing me the very weapon I would use to dismantle her. She didn't know that by trying to erase me from the guest list, she was writing her own confession. But at that moment, all I knew was silence. I was in Austin, working late on a deployment schedule for the FEMA integration, completely unaware that 1,000 miles away, my sister was printing out a script for my execution and inviting the whole town to watch. The trap was set, the lie was polished, and the invitations were in the mail. The digital age has a cruel way of delivering bad news. It does not come with a knock on the door or a solemn phone call anymore. It comes in low resolution, sandwiched between advertisements for teeth whitening strips and videos of cats. I found out I had been erased from my family on a Thursday evening. I was sitting on my couch in Austin, half watching a documentary about deep-sea exploration, scrolling mindlessly through Instagram. My thumb was on autopilot, swiping past the curated lives of strangers, until it stopped on a story posted by a second cousin of mine. Her name was Ashley, a girl who lived her entire life through filters and hashtags. The photo was blurry, taken in low light. It showed a crowded ballroom, the kind with heavy gold curtains and chandeliers that looked like upside-down wedding cakes. But it was the backdrop behind the bar that made the air freeze in my lungs. It was a custom vinyl wall, printed in elegant serif font, the Klein Family Legacy Night. I stared at the screen. My thumb hovered over the image to hold it in place. I zoomed in. I saw my mother in a silver dress, laughing with her head thrown back. I saw my father holding a Scotch glass, looking regal and satisfied. I saw Sloane, center stage, wearing a dress that looked suspiciously like a white version of the one I had worn to my own small courthouse wedding. Legacy Night. The words tasted like ash. They called it a legacy celebration. Yet the eldest daughter, the one who had spent a decade securing that legacy in the back office, was sitting in Texas, learning about it through a pixelated screen. I did not scream. I did not throw my phone. I felt a strange, hollow sensation in my chest, as if someone had reached inside and scooped out my heart with a melon baller. I called my father. It was late in Savannah, almost 11 at night, but I knew he would be awake. He answered on the third ring, the background noise of jazz music and chatter filtering through the line. "Hello," he said. He sounded happy. He sounded like a man who had won something. "Dad," I said, "it is Maisie." There was a pause. The background noise seemed to dim, as if he had stepped into a hallway. "Maisie, is everything all right?" "It is late. I saw Ashley's story." I said, cutting straight to the bone, "You are having a reunion, a legacy night." Silence stretched between us. It wasn't the silence of guilt. It was the silence of a man calculating the most efficient way to dismiss a complaint. "Oh, that," he said finally, his tone dropping into that maddeningly casual register he used when I was being difficult. "It is just a reunion, honey, just a little get-together for the locals. We didn't want to bother you. We know how busy you are with your little computer business in Texas." My little computer business had just secured a 10-year federal contract, but I didn't correct him. I am not too busy to fly home. "Dad," I said, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to keep it steel. "You invited Ashley. You invited the neighbors. Why wasn't I told?" He sighed. It was a long, heavy exhale that traveled 1,000 miles of telephone wire to tell me I was exhausting him. "You are being sensitive. Maisie, honestly, you always do this. You make everything about you. It was a last-minute thing. Sloane organized it. We just thought it would be easier not to drag you cross-country for a few cocktails. Don't make a scene over nothing. Easier." That was the word that stuck. It wasn't about distance. It was about ease. It was easier to pretend I didn't exist than to have me there. representing a reality they wanted to ignore. "Go to sleep, Maisie," he said. "We can talk next week." The line went dead. I sat there, holding the phone, listening to the silence of my apartment. Daniel walked in a moment later, carrying 2 mugs of tea. He took one look at my face and set the mugs down on the coffee table. "What did they do?" he asked. I told him. I showed him the photo. I told him what my father said. Daniel didn't get angry. He didn't rant. He sat down next to me, took my hand, and looked at the blurry photo of the banner. He studied it like a structural blueprint that had a crack in the foundation. "Maisie," he said quietly, "this isn't just a party." "What do you mean?" I asked. "People like your family don't do things by accident," he said. "Excluding you wasn't an oversight. And it wasn't because they thought you were busy. If they wanted to celebrate the family legacy, you are the first person they would call. You built half of it." He looked me in the eye. "They are hiding something," he said. "They needed you not to be there. I don't know why, but I can feel it." I wanted to tell him he was wrong. I wanted to say that they were just thoughtless, selfish narcissists. But deep down, I knew he was right. The exclusion felt tactical. It felt like a quarantine. I found out why 48 hours later. It was a Saturday afternoon. The Breakwater office was humming with activity. We were onboarding 3 new data analysts, and the energy was electric. I was in the middle of a code review when the receptionist knocked on my glass door. "Maisie." "There is a man here to see you," she said. "He says he has a delivery." I assumed it was the new server racks we had ordered. I walked out to the lobby, smiling, holding a cup of coffee. A man in a cheap windbreaker was standing by the desk. He wasn't a delivery driver. He held a thick manila envelope in his hand. "Maisie Stewart?" he asked. "Yes," I said. He thrust the envelope toward me. "You have been served." He turned and walked out before I could even blink. The lobby went quiet. My receptionist looked at me with wide eyes. I looked down at the envelope. It was heavy. It felt like a brick. My name was typed on the front in bold, aggressive letters. I walked back into my office and closed the door. I sat down. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely tear the flap open. I pulled out the stack of papers. The header at the top screamed at me in capital letters. United States Bankruptcy Court, Western District of Texas, Henry Maisie Stewart, debtor. Petition for involuntary bankruptcy. Petitioner Sloan Klein. The room spun. I actually grabbed the edge of my desk to keep from falling out of my chair. Bankruptcy, I was solvent. I had millions in secured government contracts. I had 0 debt. I forced my eyes to focus. I flipped the page. I read the allegations. The debtor, Maisie Stewart, owes the petitioner a sum of $1,800,000. The debt is past due. And then, the paragraph that made me gasp aloud. On the date of October 15th, at the Klein Family Legacy Night in Savannah, Georgia, the debtor verbally acknowledged this debt in the presence of witnesses and signed a memorandum of understanding confirming her intent to repay. I stopped breathing. October 15th, that was Saturday, that was the night of the party. The party I was not invited to, the party I was 1,000 miles away from. They were claiming I was there. I frantically flipped through the exhibits attached to the back of the petition. Exhibit A, a photocopy of a piece of paper. It was a sheet of hotel stationery from the Hotel Savannah. On it, in handwriting that looked terrifyingly familiar, were the words, "I, Maisie Stewart, acknowledge the family loan of $1.8 million and agree to terms of repayment discussed this evening." Below it was a signature. Maisie Stewart. I stared at it. It was my name. It was my loop on the M. It was my sharp cross on the T, but it was too perfect. It looked like the signature on my driver's license from 10 years ago. It lacked the hurried slant of my current signature, the one that had evolved after signing thousands of contracts. It was a forgery, a high-quality, practiced forgery. I grabbed my phone and called Nadia Reyes. Nadia was our corporate counsel. A woman who ate sharks for breakfast. "I need you," I said, now. When Nadia arrived, she read the petition in silence. She read it once. She read it twice. She didn't look shocked. She looked furious. "This is dirty. Maisie," she said, tossing the papers onto my desk. "This is incredibly dirty." "They are lying," I said, my voice rising. "I wasn't even there. I have plane tickets. I have credit card receipts in Austin. How can they file this? It is perjury." Nadia shook her head. "They know you weren't there." "That is not the point." "Then what is the point?" I demanded. "This will get thrown out in 5 minutes." "No, it won't," Nadia said. "It will take weeks to get a hearing, and in those weeks, this filing becomes public record. Do you know what happens when a federal contractor is hit with an involuntary bankruptcy petition?" I felt the blood drain from my face. "The compliance officers—" "Exactly," Nadia said. "The Federal Resilience Procurement Office will get an alert within 24 hours. They will pause the contract pending an investigation. Your accounts might be frozen. Your reputation in the industry takes a hit that you might never recover from." She pointed at the name on the petition. "Sloan doesn't want to win this case," Nadia said. "She knows she can't win on the merits. She wants to kill your company. She wants to make you radioactive. By the time we prove this is a lie, Breakwater could be dead in the water." I sat back, stunned. It wasn't a legal strategy. It was a murder attempt. They created the reunion to create the timeline. I whispered, "They needed a place where I could have supposedly signed this, and they excluded you so there would be no witnesses to say you weren't talking to them." Nadia finished. "They controlled the room. They controlled the narrative." I looked at the forged note again. The handwriting was so clean. It was written by someone who had studied my hand, someone who had access to my old documents. Sloan. My phone pinged. It was a soft sound, barely audible over the roaring in my ears. I looked down. It was an email notification. It wasn't from a lawyer. It wasn't from a client. The sender was Lena K88gmail.com. Lena, my cousin, the one who always sat in the back at family dinners, the one who was too quiet, too observant, and often ignored by Sloan and my parents. I opened the email. The subject line was blank. The body of the message was short. "Maisie, I saw what they did. I heard what they are planning. I know you weren't there. I was hiding in the audio booth near the stage because I didn't want to talk to anyone. I left my phone recording because I wanted to catch Sloan making fun of me later. I caught something else. If you want to know what they really said about you, I have the file. I am scared, Maisie, but I can't let them do this." Attached audio clip Legacy Night, MP3. I looked at Daniel. I looked at Nadia. I said, my voice shaking with a mix of terror and sudden, sharp hope. "I think we have a witness. I met Lena in the corner booth of a diner off the highway, halfway between the airport and downtown Austin. She had flown in that morning, claiming a sick day from her job at the Savannah Historical Archives. She looked terrified. Lena was the kind of person who apologized when someone else bumped into her, and sitting here, committing high treason against the Klein family, she was vibrating with anxiety. She kept checking the door every time the bell chimed. "Here," she whispered, sliding a small, silver USB drive across the laminate table. It clicked against my coffee cup. I covered it with my hand. "Thank you. Lena, you have no idea what this means." She looked down at her hands. "They are going to kill me. Maisie, if Sloan finds out I gave this to you—" "Sloan isn't going to find out," I said, my voice low and steady. "Not until it is too late for her to do anything about it." Lena took a shaky breath. "It wasn't just the recording. Maisie, I took pictures, before the guests arrived. I was helping the caterers set up the floral arrangements. I saw the table where Uncle Everett was sitting." She pulled out her phone and scrolled to a picture, then held it up for me to see. It was a photo of a round banquet table, draped in heavy white linen. There was a centerpiece of white hydrangeas, and right next to my father's place setting, sitting there like a loaded gun, was a single sheet of cream-colored paper. I zoomed in with my eyes. Even on the small screen, I could make out the header, "Loan Repayment Acknowledgement." It was there before the party started. Lena said, "Before anyone had a drink. Before you were even supposed to have arrived if you had been invited. It was a prop. Maisie. It was part of the table setting. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. This wasn't a drunken argument that went wrong. This was premeditated architectural destruction. Sloane was bragging about it in the bathroom. Lena continued, her voice barely audible. She was telling one of her friends that tonight was about narrative control. She said, and I quote, "We just need everyone to hear one story tonight. If 50 people hear it, it becomes the truth." I took the USB drive. I squeezed Lena's hand. "Go home. Lena. Act normal. You just saved my life." Back in Nadia's office. The atmosphere shifted from fear to forensic precision. We treated the investigation like a murder case, where the victim was my reputation. Nadia had hired a forensic document examiner named Dr. Aris. He was a small, fastidious man who looked at signatures through a microscope that cost more than my car. We fed him the scan of the confession attached to the bankruptcy petition, and then we gave him 20 samples of my actual signature from checks, contracts, and birthday cards over the last 5 years. He spent 3 hours in silence. When he finally looked up, he didn't smile. He just tapped the screen. "It is a simulation," he said, his voice flat. A very good one, but a simulation nonetheless. He pointed to the loop of the S in Stewart. "Look here. See this microscopic hesitation in a natural signature? The hand moves in a fluid, continuous motion. Muscle memory takes over. But here, the pen stopped for a fraction of a second. The writer was looking at a model and drawing the letter, not writing it. The pressure is also uniform throughout. A real signature has peaks and valleys of pressure. This is flat. It was traced or carefully mimicked." Nadia nodded, scribbling notes. "So we can testify it is a forgery, with 100% certainty." Dr. Aris said. That was the first bullet in our chamber. Next came the audit. I pulled my CFO, who was actually just me and a very expensive accounting software, and we ran a forensic audit of Breakwater's entire financial history. We pulled bank statements going back to the day I opened the business account with $50. We traced every influx of cash. There was the $5,000 from the first county contract. There was the $20,000 from the consulting gig in Houston. There were the milestone payments from the state. We printed out a visualization of the cash flow. It was a clean, upward line. Nowhere was there a deposit of $1.8 million. Nowhere was there a transfer from any entity named Klein. "If they loaned me the money," Nadia said, scanning the spreadsheets, "where did it go?" "You can't hide nearly $2 million. It has to hit an account somewhere. Their story falls apart on the math alone." But the math wasn't enough. We needed to prove the malice. We plugged Lena's USB drive into an air-gapped laptop. We opened the folder labeled Legacy Night Invitation. Lena had forwarded me the original PDF file that the assistant had sent to the family distribution list. I right-clicked on the file and opened the Properties tab. Then I went deeper. Using a metadata extraction tool I used for verifying source documents in my own work. The metadata told a story that was tragic in its pettiness. Author Sarah Jenkins, Executive Assistant, date created September 12th, last modified. By Sloane Klein, date modified September 14th, and then, buried in the comment field of the PDF, a feature often used for internal notes between creators, was the smoking gun. Note, final version approved. Ensure distribution list excludes Maisie. Do not forward to Maisie per SK instructions. We need the narrative to hold without interference. I stared at the screen. SK, Sloane Klein. It was right there. Digital proof that my exclusion wasn't an accident. It was a strategic directive. "We have them," Nadia said, her eyes gleaming. "This proves intent to defraud. They manufactured the scenario, but we weren't done. I needed to prove where I actually was. I opened my calendar for the weekend of October 15th. I had been in Austin, attending the Texas Tech Summit, but I needed more than just a calendar entry. I needed irrefutable proof of physical presence. I pulled my Uber ride history. October 15th, 8:30 a.m., pick up at apartment, drop off at convention center. October 15th, 6:45 p.m., pick up at convention center, drop off at Red Ash Italia for dinner. I pulled my credit card statement. October 15th, 7:12 p.m. Transaction at Red Ash Italia, $142. I pulled the conference attendance logs. The organizers used RFID badges to track which sessions attendees went to. I emailed the conference coordinator, a woman I knew, and asked for my badge data. She sent it within the hour. Badge ID 4492. Maisie Stewart. Scandit Hall. Entrance 9:15 a.m. Scandit Hall C entrance 2:30 p.m. I laid the documents out on Nadia's conference table. I was physically, digitally, and financially in Austin, Texas. I said, at the exact moment they claim I was signing a confession in a ballroom in Savannah, unless I have learned to teleport. Their entire timeline is a hallucination. It felt good. It felt like I was building a wall of bricks that they could not smash through. But just as we were high-fiving over the evidence, the phone rang. It was my banker, a man named Greg who usually only called me to congratulate me on a deposit. Maisie, he said, and his voice was tight. I am looking at your accounts. I have to freeze the line of credit. What I asked, the blood draining from my face. Why the bankruptcy petition hasn't even had a hearing yet. It is not the petition, Greg said. A UCC1 financing statement was just filed against Breakwater Signal Works, and you personally. I put the phone on speaker so Nadia could hear. A UCC what? A Uniform Commercial Code lien, Nadia whispered, her face going pale. The filer is listed as Sloan Klein, Greg continued. She is claiming a secured interest in all of your company's intellectual property and accounts receivable, based on a secured promissory note. Maisie, once a UCC is filed, it puts a cloud on the title of your assets. I can't lend against them, and per the covenants of your federal contract, you have to maintain unencumbered access to capital. This could trigger a default on your government deal. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. Sloan wasn't just trying to sue me, she was trying to starve me. By filing a lien, she was telling the world that she owned my algorithms, my computers, even the chair I was sitting in. She was claiming that the loan was secured by my company's assets. It was a lie. But the filing system for UCCs is automated. You can file one against anyone if you pay the fee. You don't have to prove it is real until someone challenges it in court. But in the meantime, the damage is done. She is trying to choke us out. I said, my voice shaking. She knows the court case will take months. She wants to kill the cash flow now. Nadia stood up and walked to the window. This is aggressive. This is scorched earth. She is risking a massive countersuit for slander of title. She must be incredibly confident that this fake loan story will hold up. Why, I asked. Why is she so sure? Because of the money trail, Nadia said, turning back to me. They must have some record of money moving. Even if it didn't go to you, they are going to use some transfer to confuse the judge. We need to find the original $1.8 million. We need to know exactly where it went and why. That was when Daniel walked in. He had been at home, digging through boxes of old hard drives I had brought from Savannah years ago. I had kept backups of my old work emails, mostly because I was paranoid about losing my portfolio. He was holding a laptop, covered in dust. I found it, he said. Found what I asked. The transaction, Daniel said. He set the laptop on the table. I searched for the date Sloan mentioned in her affidavit. He explained, 5 years ago, November. I looked at every email sent or received by your old work address on that day. He pointed to the screen. It was an email from my father to Sloan. Subject Marshland transfer. I leaned in, reading the text. Sloan, I need you to move the 1.8 from your personal account to the Shellman Bluff Holding LLC account by noon. We need to show liquidity to close the purchase on the Marsh property. I will treat it as a family loan for tax purposes and pay it back to the trust later. Do not CC the accountants yet. There it was. The $1.8 million wasn't a loan to me. It wasn't even about me. It was money my father was shuffling around to buy a piece of swampland, using Sloan as a pass-through to hide the source of funds or dodge a tax liability. Daniel scrolled down. And look at the timestamp. He said, you were copied on the reply. Maisie, but only as a BCC. I read the reply from Sloan. Done. Transfer confirmed. Reference number 00992. I had the reference number. I had the destination account. Shellman Bluff. Holding LLC. That is a company entity. I said, I don't own it. Dad does. Daniel nodded. They took a transaction between Dad and Sloan, which had nothing to do with you, and they simply changed the label. They are counting on the fact that 5 years is a long time, and that nobody would have the specific email traffic to disprove it. They didn't count on you being a digital hoarder, Nadia said, a small smile finally returning to her face. I looked at the collection of evidence on the table, the forged signature, the metadata proving the conspiracy to exclude me, the flight logs proving my alibi, and now, the email proving the money was never mine. It wasn't just a defense anymore. It was an autopsy of their corruption. Nadia picked up the stack of papers. She looked at me, and her expression was no longer just professional. It was fierce. Maisie, she said, we are going to file a motion to dismiss, obviously, but I am also going to draft a motion for sanctions, and I am going to prepare a referral to the district attorney. She paused, letting the weight of her next words settle in the room. They did not just want the money. Maisie, if they just wanted money, they would have sued you for unjust enrichment. This, the fake reunion, the forged confession, the lien on your company, this is an attempt to rewrite your entire history. They want to turn you from a self-made success into a fraud who leached off her family. They want to steal your identity as a capable person. She was right. It wasn't about the $1.8 million. It was about the narrative. They couldn't stand the version of the story where I was the hero, so they wrote a new ending where I was the villain. I stood up. I felt a cold, hard clarity settle over me. Let's file, I said, and let's send a copy to the Federal Resilience Procurement Office, along with the proof of fraud. I want the government to know exactly who is trying to sabotage their contractor. Nadia smiled. Oh, I will. And Maisie. Yes. When we walk into that courtroom next week, don't look at your father, don't look at your sister, look at the judge, because we aren't arguing with them anymore. We are ending them. The silence in the business world is never actually silent. It is a frequency you feel in your teeth. In the days following the filing of the involuntary bankruptcy petition, the phone lines at Breakwater Signal Works did not stop ringing, but the quality of the calls changed. Before, it was potential clients asking about flood prediction models. Now, it was existing partners calling to check in, their voices tight with feigned casualness, asking about our liquidity. Just for the quarterly file, the rumor mill in the federal contracting space is faster than light speed. The official notification from the procurement office hadn't even arrived yet, but the whispers were already circulating in the steakhouses of DOC and the coffee shops of Austin. Did you hear about Breakwater involuntary bankruptcy? Family dispute? Looks messy. We lost a renewal contract with a coastal county in Florida on Wednesday morning. They didn't say it was because of the lawsuit. They said they were reevaluating their vendor mix, but I knew. In this industry, stability is the product. If you look like you are drowning, nobody throws you a life jacket. They just swim away so you don't pull them down with you. I sat in my office, watching the revenue projections for the next quarter turn from solid green to a questionable yellow. My team was nervous. I could see it in the way they stopped talking when I walked past the break room. They were wondering if their paychecks would clear. They were wondering if I was a fraud. That afternoon, the olive branch arrived. It came in the form of a courier-delivered letter from Sloan's attorney. The stationery was thick, cream-colored, expensive. It smelled like the interior of a lawyer's office, like old paper and intimidation. I opened it with a letter opener that felt too heavy in my hand. Dear Ms. Stewart, our client, Ms. Sloan Klein, wishes to resolve this unfortunate family matter without further public embarrassment to all parties. She is willing to withdraw the petition for involuntary bankruptcy immediately upon your signature of the attached settlement agreement. I scanned the terms. They were simple, brutal, and humiliating. 1. Maisie Stewart agrees to pay the sum of $1,800,000 within 30 days. 2. Maisie Stewart admits the validity of the debt. 3. Both parties agreed to a non-disparagement clause. The letter ended with a sentence that made bile rise in my throat. This offer is made in the spirit of preserving the Klein family reputation and allowing Miss Stewart to continue her business operations without the stain of insolvency. It was extortion. It was a protection racket disguised as sisterly love. She was saying, "Pay me for a lie, or I will burn your house down." I handed the letter to Nadia. She read it and laughed, a dry barking sound that had no humor in it. "They are nervous," she said. "If they were confident they could crush you in court, they wouldn't offer a settlement this fast. They want the money. But more importantly, they want you to sign a paper saying the lie is true. That validates them. I am not signing it." I said, "I would rather lose the company than sign that." "You won't have to do either," Nadia said. "But get ready. They are going to squeeze harder." The squeeze came that night. My phone rang at 9 o'clock. I looked at the caller ID. Dad. I hadn't spoken to him since the brief. Dismissive call about the reunion. My thumb hovered over the decline button. I knew I shouldn't answer. I knew Nadia would tell me to let it go to voicemail. But the conditioning of 30 years is hard to break. He was my father, and a small, stupid part of me still wanted to hear him say he was sorry. I answered, "Hello, Dad." There was no greeting. "No, how are you?" His voice was low, authoritative, the voice he used when he was firing a foreman on a job site. "Maisie, I saw the draft of the settlement Sloan sent you. You haven't signed it. I am not going to sign it." "Dad," I said, "because I don't owe the money." He sighed, a loud, ragged sound of frustration. "For God's sake, Maisie, stop being stubborn. You are making a spectacle of yourself. Do you know what people are saying? Do you know how much your mother is crying? She can't even go to the country club. She is ashamed to show her face because her daughter is being dragged through the federal courts as a deadbeat." I gripped the phone so hard my hand cramped. "She is ashamed I am not the one who filed a fraudulent petition," I said, my voice trembling with contained rage. "Sloan is the one dragging us through court. She is the one lying. She is trying to recoup family assets," he shouted, his voice booming through the speaker. "Assets you took. And now you are holding the whole family hostage because of your pride. Just pay the money. Maisie, you have those government contracts now. You can afford it. Make this go away. End this." It wasn't about the truth. It was never about the truth. It was about the inconvenience. I was the problem because I was refusing to be the victim they needed. "Dad," I asked, forcing my voice to drop to a whisper, "I need you to answer me one thing." What he snapped. "You were at the party. You were at the legacy night." "Yes, obviously. And you told the judge, through your lawyer, that I was there too, that I stood in front of you and admitted I owed this money." There was a pause, a heavy static-filled silence. I asked, "How could I have done that? Dad, how could I have admitted a debt to your face when I wasn't even in the state? You know I wasn't there. You know you didn't invite me. I waited for the crack. I waited for him to stumble, to admit the absurdity of it." Instead, his voice turned cold, stripped of all fatherly warmth. "Don't play word games with me. Maisie, you know what you owe. The technicalities don't matter. The moral obligation is there. Stop hiding behind geography and do what is right. Don't play word games." That was it. That was the tombstone on our relationship. To him. The fact that I was physically 1,000 miles away was just a technicality. The truth was, whatever he needed it to be to maintain his world. I hung up. I didn't say goodbye. I just pressed the red button and severed the line. The next morning, we went on the offensive. Nadia drafted a response to Sloan's lawyer. It wasn't a settlement negotiation. It was a declaration of war. We filed a motion to dismiss based on bad faith, but Nadia went further. She drafted a Rule 11 motion for sanctions. In the legal world, this is the nuclear option against another attorney. It accuses them of filing a frivolous lawsuit without doing due diligence. It puts their law license at risk. In the letter attached to the motion, Nadia wrote, "We are in possession of irrefutable evidence, including digital metadata, travel records, and audio recordings, that prove the alleged confession never occurred. If this petition is not withdrawn by close of business tomorrow, We will be forwarding our evidence to the United States Attorney's Office for investigation into bankruptcy fraud and perjury. We sent it. We waited. I expected them to fold. I expected Sloan to panic and pull the plug. But I underestimated how deep the rot went. I underestimated how desperate Sloan was to win. 2 days before the hearing, we received a notification from the court's electronic filing system. Sloan's team had submitted supplemental evidence. I opened the file on my computer. My stomach dropped. Affidavits. 2 of them. One was from my Aunt Patty. The other was from a cousin named Mark. I read Aunt Patty's statement first. I, Patricia Klein, attest that I attended the Klein family legacy night on October 15th. During the cocktail hour, I witnessed Maisie Stewart in conversation with her sister, Sloan. I distinctly heard Maisie say, "I know I owe the money for the startup, and I will pay it back when I can." I read Mark's statement. It was almost identical. I saw Maisie Stewart at the event. She looked agitated. She admitted to the debt in my presence. I stared at the screen, feeling a sense of vertigo. These were people I had grown up with. Aunt Patty used to knit me sweaters. Mark and I had learned to ride bikes together. They were lying. They were swearing under penalty of perjury that they saw a ghost. Why, I asked Daniel, my voice hollow. Why would they do this? "Because your father pays their mortgages," Daniel said gently. "Patty has been living off the family trust for years. Mark works for one of your dad's shell companies. If Everett Klein tells them to see you at the party, they see you at the party. They aren't just lying for Sloan. They are lying for their supper." It was terrifying. It wasn't just a lie anymore. It was a collective hallucination enforced by economic power. My family had created a cult of reality where I was present, I was guilty, and I was indebted. Then came the text from Lena. "Maisie. Sloan knows I was in the sound booth. She's asking me questions. She wants to know if I saw anyone else back there. She wants me to sign an affidavit too. She is pressuring me hard. She says if I don't help the family, I am against the family." I could feel Lena's fear through the screen. She was the youngest. She was vulnerable. She didn't have a company in Texas or a husband like Daniel. She was alone in the belly of the beast. I called her. She picked up on the first ring, crying, "I can't do it. Maisie," she sobbed, "I can't sign it. But if I don't, Dad says. He says Uncle Everett will cut off my tuition for grad school. They are threatening my future. I am sorry. I can't testify for you. Please don't make me." I closed my eyes. I imagined Lena, small and shaking, surrounded by the wolves I had escaped. "Lena, listen to me," I said. "You don't have to testify. You don't have to save me. But the recording," she stammered. "We have the recording." I said, "I won't call you to the stand unless I absolutely have to. But Lena, promise me one thing. What, don't sign their lie. You don't have to fight for me. But don't sell your soul for them. Just tell them you didn't see anything. Tell them you were in the bathroom. Play dumb. But don't put your name on a lie. Once you do that, they own you forever." There was a long silence. Then, a small voice. "Okay, I will hide. I won't sign." We hung up. I felt a weight on my chest. They were tearing the whole family apart, piece by piece, just to bring me down. The night before the hearing was the longest night of my life. I sat in the conference room with Nadia and Daniel. The table was covered in binders, the flight logs, the audit, the forensic report on the signature, the metadata. We had the truth. But looking at those affidavits from Patty and Mark, I felt a seed of doubt. What if the judge believes them? What if 2 witnesses outweigh 1 flight manifest? Courts are human institutions. Humans are fallible. At 11:30 at night, Nadia's laptop pinged. She frowned. She opened her email. "It is from opposing counsel," she said. "Sloan's lawyer." My heart hammered. What does it say? Nadia read it, her eyebrows shooting up. "Ms. Reyes, regarding tomorrow's hearing, my client is reviewing the supplemental materials you sent over regarding the travel logs. We believe there may be a path to a private resolution. Would you be available for a call at 7 a.m. prior to court?" Nadia looked up at me. A slow, shark-like smile spread across her face. "They looked at the flight records," she said. They finally looked at the evidence we sent with the sanctions motion, and I asked, and they are terrified. She said, "You don't ask for a private talk at 7 a.m. on the day of a hearing unless you know you're about to walk into a buzzsaw. They know the affidavits are perjury. They know the signature is fake. They are trying to find an exit door before the judge locks them in." "So we win?" I asked. Nadia closed her laptop. "No, we don't talk. We don't settle. We let them walk into that courtroom and explain to a federal judge why his courtroom is being used as a stage for a family vendetta. I went home, but I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark of my living room, the glow of the streetlights filtering through the blinds. I pulled up the image of the invitation again on my phone, the digital file that Sloan had marked, "Do Not Forward, Klein Family Legacy Night." I looked at the gold font. I looked at the promise of heritage and belonging. For weeks, I had been hurt that I wasn't invited. I had felt the sting of rejection. But sitting there, in the quiet hours before dawn, the perspective shifted. I wasn't uninvited because I was unloved, though that was true. I wasn't uninvited because I was forgotten. I was uninvited because my presence would have ruined the play. That ballroom in Savannah wasn't a party. It was a courtroom. It was a tribunal they had set up to convict me in absentia. They needed an empty chair so they could project their sins onto it. They needed a ghost because a real person would have fought back. They didn't want a reunion. They wanted a sacrifice. But they had made a fatal error. They assumed the ghost would stay dead. They assumed the girl in the shadows would stay quiet. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Austin skyline, the city where I had built something real, something they couldn't touch. "Tomorrow," I whispered to the glass. "Tomorrow, the ghost shows up." The courtroom was a theater, and my family had cast themselves as the tragic heroes. When the hearing began, the air in the room felt heavy, pressurized by the silence that precedes a storm. I sat next to Nadia, keeping my hands folded on the table to stop them from shaking. Across the aisle, Sloan sat with her spine rigid, radiating a fragility that I knew was calculated. My parents were behind her. My mother, Marilyn, was already dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, though the proceedings had barely started. My father, Everett, sat with his arms crossed, his face set in a grim expression of paternal disappointment. Sloan's lawyer, Mr. Vance, stood up. He was a man who clearly believed in the power of performance. He walked to the center of the room, buttoning his jacket, and looked up at Judge Holloway with a sorrowful expression. "Your Honor," he began, his voice thick with manufactured gravitas. "This is not a case about accounting errors. It is a case about betrayal. The Klein family is a pillar of the Savannah community. They have built a legacy on trust and honor. They extended a hand to Ms. Stewart when she was struggling. They gave her a loan of $1,800,000, a lifeline to help her build her dreams." He paused, turning to look at me with a look of pity that made my skin crawl. And how did she repay them? With silence, with denial. And now, by forcing her own sister to drag this matter into a federal court to recoup what is rightfully owed. The family gave her a chance. She betrayed that chance. I heard my mother let out a soft, audible sob. It was perfect timing. My father reached over and patted her hand, then looked at the judge and nodded slowly, affirming the narrative. It was the same play they had run 1,000 times in living rooms and country clubs, only now, the stakes were my entire life. Vance continued. "We are here because on October 15th, at the Klein Family Legacy Night, a reunion intended to heal old wounds, Stewart finally faced her family. In a private moment during the festivities, she verbally acknowledged this debt. She admitted she had taken the money, and she signed a memorandum to that effect, which we have submitted as Exhibit A." He pointed to the document on the clerk's desk. "The forgery, the lie made of paper, the facts are simple." "Your Honor," Vance concluded. "She was there. She confessed. She owes the money. The petition for involuntary bankruptcy is the only tool left to a family that has been taken advantage of by a prodigal daughter." He sat down. The room was silent. My father looked at me, his eyes hard and triumphant. He thought it was over. He thought the story was enough. Nadia stood up. She did not sigh. She did not look at the gallery. She walked to the podium with a stack of files in her arms, moving with the precision of a surgeon approaching an operating table. "Your Honor," Nadia said, her voice cool and dangerously calm. "Mr. Vance tells a compelling story. It is a story about a reunion, a confession, and a signed agreement. It is a very emotional story." She placed the files on the podium. "However," Nadia continued, "courts of law do not run on stories. They run on evidence, and the evidence will show that every single word we just heard is a fabrication." Vance shifted in his seat. I saw Sloane's eyes narrow. "First," Nadia said, picking up the first document, "the petitioner claims that this event was a family reunion where my client was welcome to heal old wounds. We submit into evidence Defense Exhibit 1. This is the digital metadata from the electronic invitation file sent by Mr. Everett Klein's executive assistant." She waited for the clerk to hand the document to the judge. "If you look at the administrative notes embedded in the file, Your Honor, you will see a directive written by Sloane Klein on September 14th. It reads, 'Do not forward to Maisie. Ensure distribution list excludes her.'" A murmur ran through the courtroom. Judge Holloway looked at the paper, then over his glasses at Sloane. Sloane went rigid. "My client was not invited to heal wounds," Nadia said. "She was deliberately excluded, but that is just the prologue. Let us discuss the main event." Nadia picked up the next binder. It was thick. The petitioner claims that on the evening of October 15th, Maisie Stewart was in Savannah, Georgia, at the Hotel Savannah, where she signed a confession of debt. Nadia opened the binder and held up a colorful chart. This is a timeline of Ms. Stewart's physical location on that day. At 8:30 in the morning, her Uber account shows a pickup at her apartment in Austin, Texas. At 9:15, her RFID badge was scanned at the entrance of the Texas Tech Summit in downtown Austin. She flipped the page. At 2:30 in the afternoon, while the cocktail hour was allegedly beginning in Savannah, Ms. Stewart was scanning into a seminar on coastal erosion data in Hall C of the Austin Convention Center. She flipped the page again, and at 7:12 in the evening, the exact time the petitioner's affidavits claim Ms. Stewart was signing a document in Georgia. Her credit card was being swiped at Red Ash Italia restaurant in Austin for a dinner bill of $142. Nadia looked directly at my father. "Unless the Klein family is suggesting that Ms. Stewart has mastered the laws of physics to be in two states at once, separated by 1,000 miles, it is physically impossible for her to have been at that reunion." Vance stood up, looking flustered. "Your Honor, these could be errors. Someone else could have used her card." "Sit down." "Mr. Vance," Judge Holloway snapped. He was flipping through the travel logs, his face darkening with every page. Nadia didn't let up. She moved to the third pile. "Third," Nadia said, "the signature. The petitioner has submitted a handwritten note allegedly signed by my client. We submit Defense Exhibit 3, the sworn report of Dr. Aris, a forensic document examiner with 30 years of experience with the FBI." She held up the report. "Dr. Aris concludes that the signature on Exhibit A is a simulation. It lacks the fluid muscle memory of a genuine signature. The pen pressure is uniform, indicating it was drawn, not written. It is a forgery, Your Honor, and a clumsy one at that." My mother had stopped crying. She was staring at Nadia with her mouth slightly open, the tissue forgotten in her hand. My father's face had turned a mottled shade of red. He whispered something to Sloane, but she didn't answer. She was staring straight ahead, her knuckles white as she gripped the table. They were watching their reality disintegrate, but Nadia had one final blow to deliver. "Your Honor," Nadia said, her voice dropping to a register that commanded absolute silence. "The petitioner's counsel asked why a family would file such a drastic petition. He called it a betrayal. We agree. It is a betrayal, but not by my client." She pulled the USB drive from her pocket. "We received this audio file from a witness who was present in the ballroom that night. A witness who is terrified of her own family, but refused to let this lie stand." Vance jumped up. "Objection. We haven't authenticated this source overruled, Judge Holloway said, his voice like ice. If this speaks to the credibility of the filing, I want to hear it. Play it. Nadia nodded to the clerk. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the hard drive spinning up. Then, the static crackled through the courtroom speakers. The sound of glasses clinking, the background murmur of a party, and then, my sister's voice. Clear, arrogant, undeniable. It doesn't matter if the loan is real. Dad? Then my father's voice. I know. But are you sure she won't show up, Sloane's voice again? Dripping with that condescending confidence I knew so well. I blocked her email. She has no idea this is happening. And honestly, if she doesn't come, it is easier. Just stick to the script. As long as she isn't here to deny it, everyone will believe the version we tell them. We just need a collective memory. The recording ended. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. It was the sound of a guillotine blade having dropped, leaving everyone staring at the severed head. I looked at my family. My father was staring at the table, refusing to look up. He looked smaller, deflated, stripped of the authority he wore like armor. My mother looked terrified, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an exit. But it was Sloane I focused on. Her face, usually a mask of perfect, glossy composure, was fracturing. Her mouth twitched. Her eyes were wide, glassy with panic. She looked like a child who had been caught holding the match that started the fire. She turned to her lawyer, but Vance was physically leaning away from her, creating distance between himself and the radioactive fallout of her lies. Judge Holloway slowly took off his glasses. He placed them on the bench with a deliberate click. He did not look at the papers anymore. He looked directly at the petitioner's table. In 20 years on the bench, the judge said, his voice shaking with suppressed anger, I have seen greed, I have seen incompetence, but I have rarely seen a litigant attempt to use this court as a prop in a personal theater production. He leaned forward. You filed a federal bankruptcy petition, a document that can destroy a company's livelihood, based on a debt you knew didn't exist, confirmed at a meeting you ensured the defendant could not attend, supported by a document you forged. Vance tried to stand. Your Honor, I was not aware. The judge cut him off with a hand slash. You are an officer of the court. Mr. Vance, if you didn't know, you should have. But your clients? He looked at Sloane. She flinched. Ms. Klein, you seem to treat the truth as a variable you can adjust to suit your needs. Let me be clear. Perjury is not a strategy. Bankruptcy fraud is not a business tactic. These are felonies. The word hung in the air. Felonies. I am dismissing this petition with prejudice, immediately, Judge Holloway announced. But I am not stopping there. I am directing the clerk to seal the evidence presented by the defense today and forward the entire file to the United States Attorney's Office. I am recommending a formal investigation into bankruptcy fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit perjury. He slammed the gavel down. It sounded like a gunshot. This hearing is adjourned, and God help you. The room erupted into chaos. Reporters in the back row were typing furiously. The bailiff moved toward the gate. I sat still. I didn't cheer. I didn't smile. I just watched Sloane. She wasn't looking at me anymore. She was staring at the judge, her mouth opening and closing. No sound coming out. The golden girl, the one who was always right, the one who was allowed to make mistakes, had finally made one she couldn't smile her way out of. The crack in her facade was complete. She wasn't the Queen of Savannah anymore. She was just a liar in a navy suit, and the walls were closing in. Nadia closed her folder. She turned to me, her eyes fierce. That, she whispered, is how you rewrite the ending. I looked at my hands. They had stopped shaking. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of them. I wasn't the daughter who needed their permission to exist. I was the witness to their self-destruction. Come on, Maisie, Nadia said, standing up. Let's go. The air is better outside. I stood up. I didn't look back at my parents. I walked out of the courtroom, leaving them in the wreckage they had built for me, which had collapsed, finally and fatally, on top of them. The aftermath of Judge Holloway's ruling did not feel like a victory lap. It felt like watching a controlled demolition of a building that I used to live in. There was no dust, no debris, just the terrifyingly efficient sound of structural beams snapping one by one. The dismissal of the bankruptcy petition was immediate, but the judge's order went far beyond simply throwing out the case. He issued a show cause order, requiring Sloan and her legal team to explain why they should not be sanctioned for filing a pleading that lacked evidentiary support. He essentially told them to prove they hadn't lied. Knowing full well that they had, that was when the first domino fell. And it fell right on top of Sloan. Mr. Vance, the lawyer who had so theatrically accused me of betrayal just an hour earlier, stood up. He did not look at Sloan. He looked at the judge, and his survival instinct kicked in with a speed that was almost impressive. "Your Honor," Vance said, his voice stripped of its earlier bluster, "I wish to state for the record that as counsel, I relied entirely on the factual representations provided to me by my client. I was assured that the documents were authentic. If the court finds evidence of fabrication, I must inform the court that I was not a party to it. I reserve the right to withdraw from this representation effectively immediately." I watched Sloan. For the first time in her life, she was completely alone in a room full of people. Her shield had just turned into a spear and pointed it at her throat. She looked at Vance, her mouth opening to argue, but he was already packing his briefcase. He was distancing himself from the blast zone. The legal machinery that followed was cold and mechanical, because the allegation involved the misuse of the federal bankruptcy court, a system designed to protect creditors. Not to settle family scores, the United States Trustee's Office got involved. They are the watchdogs of the bankruptcy system, and they do not care about family legacies or social standing in Savannah. They care about the integrity of the code. They didn't ask nicely for documents. They demanded them. Within 48 hours, a forensic preservation order was sent to Klein Enterprises. They demanded copies of all email servers, internal communication logs, and hard drives related to the loan and the reunion. My father tried to fight it. Of course, he claimed attorney-client privilege. He claimed the scope was too broad. But when a federal judge has already flagged your case for fraud, your objections are read with a very skeptical eye. The order stood, and that was when the second domino fell. The investigators found the email chain. We had already found the metadata note, but the servers revealed the conversation that birthed it. It was an email from my father's executive assistant, Sarah, sent directly to Sloan 3 weeks before the party. Subject: Guest list finalization. Sloan: Your father wanted me to double-check the exclusion list. I have removed Maisie from the Evite system as requested. However, Dad is worried she might see it on social media. He wants to know if we should send a dummy invite to an old email address just to cover our tracks. And Sloan's reply: Time-stamped 20 minutes later, no, do not send anything. If she gets a dummy invite, she might actually show up. We need zero risk of her presence. Just ensure the narrative is that we tried to reach her. I will handle the rest. It was the smoking gun that linked my father to the conspiracy. He wasn't just a passive observer who nodded along to Sloan's lies. He was the architect of the exclusion. He had directed his staff to isolate me while simultaneously preparing to tell a court that I had been welcomed with open arms. The revelation hit the family like a physical blow. My father could no longer pretend he was the unaware patriarch. He was a co-conspirator. Then came the human cost. Lena was subpoenaed. She didn't want to testify. She called me the night before her deposition, hyperventilating. She was terrified that if she spoke against the family, she would be cut off no tuition, no rent, no family holidays. But Nadia had explained the alternative to her. If she lied to federal investigators about what she saw in the ballroom, she could be charged with obstruction of justice. You have a choice, Lena, I had told her. You can be broke for a while, or you can be a felon forever. She chose to be broke. I wasn't in the room for her deposition, but Nadia was. She told me about it later. She said Lena sat there, small and trembling in a large leather chair, and answered every question with a quiet, devastating honesty. Did you see Maisie Stewart at the party? No. Did you see the document on the table before the party began? Did you hear Sloane Klein discuss the plan to fabricate a story? Yes. I heard her say that as long as Maisie wasn't there, they could make the truth whatever they wanted it to be. When Lena walked out of that room, she was crying. She knew she had just burned her bridge back to the Klein family, but she also walked out with a clean conscience. She was the only one of them who did. The walls were closing in on Savannah. The local papers had picked up the story. Prominent developer's daughter, accused of bankruptcy fraud. The headlines were not kind. The clean reputation my mother valued above all else was being dragged through the mud, not by me, but by the very actions they had taken to destroy me. That was when my father called. It was a Tuesday night. I was in my kitchen in Austin, making dinner with Daniel. The phone rang. I saw the name and hesitated, but then I picked up. I wanted to hear it. I wanted to hear the sound of the king when his castle was burning. "Maisie," he said. His voice was unrecognizable. The booming authority was gone. The condescension was gone. In its place was a raw, trembling fear. He sounded old. He sounded like a man who had looked at his future and seen nothing but lawyers and indictments. "We need to stop this," he said. I stirred the sauce on the stove. "I didn't stop it. Dad, you started it. You don't understand," he pleaded. "The investigators, they are asking for everything. They are looking at the Shellman Bluff transfers. They are looking at the tax records from 5 years ago. Maisie, if they keep digging, they are going to ruin us. Your mother, she hasn't left her room in 3 days." I felt a pang of sadness, but it was distant, like looking at a photograph of a tragedy that happened to someone else. "I can't stop a federal investigation." "Dad," I said, "that is out of my hands. You can." He insisted, his voice rising in desperation. "You can issue a statement. You can say it was a misunderstanding. You can tell them we settled it privately. If you drop the pressure, maybe they will back off. You are destroying this family. Maisie, you are tearing us apart." I stopped stirring. I put the spoon down. I looked at Daniel, who was watching me with a protective intensity. "I am not destroying the family." "Dad," I said, my voice steady and cold, "I am just refusing to let the family destroy me." "There is a difference. You are my daughter," he shouted, the old anger flaring up for a second. "You owe us loyalty. I owed you the truth," I said, "and I gave it to you. You chose to try and bury me with it." I hung up. I blocked the number. It was the last time I would ever speak to him without a lawyer present. The next day, the desperation shifted to Sloane. Since she had lost her lawyer, she was scrambling. She sent an email directly to Nadia, bypassing all professional protocols. It was a settlement offer, but it read more like a ransom note from a kidnapper who realized the police were already surrounding the building. Subject: proposal for resolution. Nadia, I am willing to withdraw the petition immediately and issue a formal apology to Maisie regarding the misunderstanding about the debt. In exchange, Maisie agrees to sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding the events of the reunion and the subsequent legal filings. I am also willing to offer a settlement of $50,000 to cover her legal fees as a gesture of goodwill. We just want to put this behind us and restore the family peace. I read the email over Nadia's shoulder. $50,000, I said, shaking my head. She thinks she can buy her way out of a felony for the price of a mid-sized sedan. She still doesn't get it, Nadia said, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She thinks this is a transaction. She thinks she broke a contract, not the law. Nadia typed her reply. It was 2 sentences long. Ms. Klein, there is no concept of compensation for a fraudulent filing submitted to a federal court. My client declines your offer, and we will continue to cooperate fully with the U.S. Trustee's investigation. She hit send. The refusal was the final blow. It broke the last illusion they had that they could control the outcome. And when people like the Kleins lose control, they turn on each other. The reports came back to me through Lena, who was still in touch with the housekeeper. The house in Savannah had become a war zone. My mother, unable to lash out at the society ladies who were now shunning her, turned her rage on my father. She blamed him for his weakness, for his sloppy record-keeping, for not managing me better over the years. She screamed that he had let the family name become a punchline. My father, stripped of his business armor, turned on Sloane. He blamed her for the reunion idea. He yelled that she was sloppy, that her arrogance had blinded her to the risks. He shouted that she had led him into a trap, that she had promised it would be easy, and instead she had brought the federal government to their doorstep. You said she wouldn't fight back, he reportedly screamed at her in the library. You said she was weak, and Sloane the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. She didn't take responsibility. She couldn't. Her ego wouldn't allow it. She blamed everyone else. She blamed the lawyer for being incompetent. She blamed Lena for being a traitor. She blamed the assistant for not deleting the emails. She blamed the guests for not lying convincingly enough. It was a perfect plan. She screamed back at them. It only failed because nobody played their part right. She didn't see that the script was flawed from the beginning. She didn't see that the villain of her story, me, had simply refused to read the lines she wrote. I sat in my office in Austin, looking at the final court order on my desk. The nightmare was over for me. Breakwater Signal Works was safe. The government contract was secure. The lien had been dissolved. But for them, the nightmare was just beginning. They were trapped in that big, beautiful house in Savannah, surrounded by expensive furniture and rotting trust, tearing each other apart to see who would be the last one left standing when the indictment finally arrived. I felt a strange sense of peace. I hadn't sought revenge. I hadn't tried to hurt them. I had simply held up a mirror, and they couldn't survive what they saw in the reflection. The sound of the final gavel was not a bang, it was a severance. When Judge Holloway delivered his final ruling, the courtroom did not erupt into chaos. Instead, it settled into a heavy, suffocating stillness, the kind that follows a natural disaster when the winds have finally died down and the survivors are left to look at the wreckage. The judge looked down at Sloane, his expression stripped of any patience he might have harbored at the beginning of the week. He adjusted his robe and spoke with a clarity that left no room for interpretation. The petition for involuntary bankruptcy is dismissed with prejudice, he stated. That means you cannot fix it. You cannot refile it. You cannot dress this lie up in a different suit and bring it back to my court. It is dead. He paused, letting the weight of that word settle over the defense table. Furthermore, he continued, I am referring the entire record of these proceedings, including the fabricated exhibits and the contradictory affidavits, to the Office of the United States Attorney and the Georgia State Bar Association. This court finds that there is substantial evidence of a coordinated effort to defraud a federal tribunal. The penalties for such actions are not within my power to levy today, but rest assured, the process to determine them begins the moment you walk out those doors. Sloane did not move. She sat frozen, her posture perfect, her hands clasped on the table, but her eyes were empty. For the first time in her life, she was looking at a problem she could not charm, bribe, or bully her way out of. The reality of her situation was beginning to dawn on her, and I could practically see the calculations running through her mind. In the world of high-stakes real estate and finance, reputation is not just a vanity metric, it is collateral. A bankruptcy filing is public record. A judicial finding of fraud is a permanent scarlet letter. From this day forward, every bank she applied to for a loan would see this. Every potential partner who Googled her name would find the court order, the golden child, the one who was supposed to inherit the kingdom, had just torched the castle. She was no longer the brilliant prodigy of the Klein family. She was a liability. She was the woman who tried to frame her sister and got caught. I stood up. I felt light, the crushing pressure that had sat on my chest for weeks, the fear of losing my company, the shame of the accusations, the anxiety of the confrontation had evaporated. Nadia packed her briefcase with a satisfying snap. She looked at me and nodded. We are done here. Maisie. We walked toward the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom. I did not look at my parents as I passed the gallery. I could hear my mother weeping, a soft, jagged sound, but I did not stop. I walked through the doors and into the wide marble corridor of the federal courthouse. The light out here was different. It filtered in through the high windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It felt clean. I was halfway to the elevators when I heard it. Maisie. It was my father's voice. He wasn't shouting. He spoke my name with the same heavy, expectant cadence he had used since I was 5 years old. It was a tone that assumed I would stop. It was a tone that assumed he still held the remote control to my life and could pause me whenever he wished. I stopped, but I didn't turn around immediately. I took a breath. I looked at Daniel, who had tensed up beside me. I squeezed his hand, signaling that I was okay. Then, slowly, deliberately, I turned to face them. They were standing in a cluster near the courtroom doors. My father looked smaller than I remembered. His suit looked expensive but tired. My mother was clinging to his arm, her makeup streaked, looking at me with a desperate, pleading expression. Sloane stood a few feet behind them, looking at the floor. My father took a step toward me. He squared his shoulders, trying to summon the ghost of his authority. "We need to discuss how to handle the press," he said. His voice was brisk, businesslike. "If we issue a joint statement, we might be able to mitigate the damage to the family trust. We can say it was a miscommunication. We can say I looked him in the eye. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. Don't," I said. He stopped. He looked confused, as if I had spoken a language he didn't understand. "Don't," what he asked. "Don't call me by that voice," I said. My voice was low, but it carried down the empty hallway like a bell. "You do not get to give me orders anymore. You do not get to manage me. You stood in that courtroom and watched your lawyer call me a traitor. You helped plan a party designed to erase me. You lost the right to speak to me as a father the moment you decided I was just collateral damage for your bank account." My mother stepped forward. Her hands were shaking. "Maisie, please," she choked out. "We just want you to come back. We just want to be a family. We just want a reunion." I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had taught me that love was conditional, that affection was something you earned by being useful. A reunion. I repeated. The word tasted bitter. "If you really wanted a reunion, Mom, you would have invited me to the party." She opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off. "You didn't want a reunion. You wanted a scapegoat. You didn't construct a fake gathering to bring me home. You constructed it to judge me in my absence. You wanted the benefits of having a daughter without the inconvenience of treating her like a human being. The truth hung in the air between us." My mother looked down, defeated. She knew I was right. She had always known, then, from the back of the group. Sloane spoke. Her voice was brittle, like dry leaves stepping on pavement. I couldn't stand it. I shifted my gaze to her. She finally looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed, stripped of their usual arrogance. For the first time, I saw her not as the monster who tried to destroy me, but as the pathetic, broken thing she really was. "Couldn't stand what—" "Sloane?" I asked. "I couldn't stand the fact that you won," she whispered. "You went to Texas. You had nothing. Everyone said you would fail. Dad said you would be back in 6 months. And then, you didn't come back. You built something huge. You got the government contracts. You got the recognition." She took a shaking breath. "And you did it without us," she said. "You did it without the money, without the connections, without the name. I couldn't stand it. Maisie. It made me feel like everything I have is fake, because I needed them to get it, and you didn't." There it was, the ugly, naked heart of the matter. It wasn't about the $1,800,000. It wasn't about the debt. It was about the terrifying realization that her entire identity was built on nepotism, while mine was built on iron. She hadn't tried to bankrupt me because she needed the cash. She tried to bankrupt me because my success was a mirror she couldn't bear to look into. I looked at her, and I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt a profound, distancing pity. "You are right, Sloane," I said softly. "You have the name, you have the connections, you have the approval, and now you have the consequences." I turned to Nadia. Nadia stepped forward, placing her body between me and my family like a shield. She looked at my father, then at Sloane's retreating lawyer who was hovering by the elevator. From this moment forward, Nadia said, her voice sharp as a razor. All communication goes through my office. If you attempt to contact Ms. Stewart by phone, email, or in person, I will file for a restraining order. Do not test me. My father opened his mouth to protest, to say something to regain control, but the elevator doors dinged open behind me. Daniel took my hand. His grip was warm and solid. He didn't say anything to them. He didn't need to. His presence was the silent testament to the life I had built, a life defined by loyalty, not leverage. I looked at them one last time. The three of them stood there in the hallway, a tableau of a dynasty that had crumbled under the weight of its own lies. You know, I said, my voice steady, that party, the one you tried so hard to keep me away from. Dad called it a reunion. I called it the one party I deserved to be at. My father looked at me, his eyes filled with a sudden, sharp regret. But I realized something today. I continued. I didn't deserve to be there because I needed your validation. I didn't deserve to be there because I needed to be celebrated. I deserve to be there because I am a person. I deserve to be treated with the basic dignity you give to strangers, and you chose not to do the bare minimum. I stepped into the elevator. You can have your legacy, I said as the doors began to slide shut. I have my life. I pressed the button for the lobby. My father took a step forward, reaching out a hand. Maisie. The doors closed. The click of the latch was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a book closing. It was the sound of a chain breaking. I stood in the descending elevator, watching the numbers count down. Lobby, ground floor, exit. I looked at Daniel. I looked at Nadia. And for the first time in 30 years, I didn't wonder what my family thought of me. I didn't care. I walked out of the courthouse and into the bright, blinding sun of the Texas afternoon. I took a deep breath of air that tasted like freedom. I had walked into that building as a defendant, accused of owing a debt I could never repay. I was walking out as a creditor who had finally decided to write off a bad investment. I was free, and I didn't look back. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you have ever felt like the black sheep who had to fight for your own place in the world, or if you have ever had to close the door on toxic family members to save yourself, I want to hear from you. Please leave a comment down below telling me where you are listening from and share your own experiences. Let's support each other in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story and want to hear more revenge stories and family dramas, please make sure to subscribe to the Maya Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button so this story can reach even more people who need to hear it. See you in the next one.